Hello and welcome to Birthright Ballads, a podcast about folksong and memory. I'm Jamie Cook, and today's episode is about a New Year's carol called The Moon Shines Bright, and stargazing.
Oh, the moon shines bright, and the stars give her light, a little while before the day. Now the bell it is rung, I will walk the journey long, and I bid you awake and pray. Awake, awake, and I bid you awake and pray.
Awake, awake, good people all, awake and you will hear. Instruct and teach your children well, oh, and love them and hold them dear.
Awake, awake, oh, and love them and hold them dear.
I don't know when my dad got a telescope, or when he got rid of it, but I'm sure I didn't imagine it. There was a telescope at some time in my childhood, or my early teenagehood to be more precise. I know this because I can date it by which house we were living in, and I can picture the telescope sat out in the garden. Mostly, I remember my dad sat out in the garden for what seemed like hours, setting the sight and the tracking and whatnot, and I remember not being allowed to turn on the kitchen light because the glare out the windows into the back garden would spoil his night vision whilst he was trying to align his star charts with the actual night sky. I remember a red torch, and learning that you can look at something under a red light and it won't reverse the adjustment to the darkness that your eyes have made, and that astronomers use red lights to look at their charts when they're stargazing. And then I remember my dad calling me outside because it was ready. Him telling me to be really careful not to knock it, but to lean my head over the eyepiece and take a look, which I did. And there I saw Saturn, floating gently across the night sky, a steady arc from one side of the little lens to the other, pearly white with its rings encircling it in a little planetary embrace. And my first thought was, that doesn't look real. In fact, it looked exactly like those sticky plastic glow-in-the-dark stars me and my brother had stuck to our bedroom ceiling when we were younger. You know the ones I mean. There'd been pointy stars and round stars and different phases of the moon, and like the little chewy man in a packet of licorice allsorts, there'd been a single, lone, glow-in-the-dark Saturn, distinguishable by its rings. And that was what I was looking at now, through this telescope. I asked my dad if it was real. For a moment, I suspected he might have cut out a cartoon picture of Saturn and stuck it to the inside of the eyepiece somehow to try and trick me. No way could an ordinary person see the rings of Saturn from their back garden. It was an almost full Saturn. Until that point, I hadn't really considered that the planets have phases like our moon does, but of course they do. We don't notice it when we look with the naked eye, everything just looks like a circular dot of light, but viewed through a telescope, you can see the way the sun reflects off one face of the planet, and depending on its position relative to us, leaves another face cast in darkness. The inner planets, Mercury and Venus, may have a new phase where they sit between the Earth and the Sun, and so are invisible to us in the Sun's glare. But the outer planets, they only have a full or a gibbous phase, or otherwise they're hidden behind the Sun entirely and are out of sight. I often think about how familiar the night sky and its movements must have been to our ancestors, not even very long ago. I live in a city with light pollution and tallish buildings, and one thing I miss deeply in the city is seeing properly dark skies. I am okay at reading the night sky. I can recognise a few key constellations. I know how to find the North Star. I know where to find the brightest star in the sky, Sirius, at least in winter time, and so if I see something brighter still, I know it's probably a planet. I know that Venus is seen near the horizon, close to sunrise or sunset. I know if it's quite red, then it's likely to be Mars, and that if it's high in the sky or long after sunset, then Jupiter or Saturn are good guesses. But at this point for me, it is becoming guesswork. I think that's not bad for someone who lives in a city and doesn't see the stars that often. But I also think about people living hundreds or thousands of years ago and how they might have interacted with the night sky. A bit like learning a language, I assume they would have had a familiarity with it simply through proximity and exposure, recognizing the shapes and patterns in it that I just don't see because I don't spend enough time looking at it. These days, I have an app on my phone that tells me what I'm looking at when I'm out stargazing. When my dad was setting up his telescope, he used tables and charts written down in little books, calculating angles and coordinates from the time and date, and frankly, I think that's some kind of wizardry. But people thousands of years ago might have had a knowledge of the night sky developed just through a lifetime of sitting under it every night and soaking it up, and I find that quite beautiful. I was surprised at how quickly Saturn moved across the viewfinder and how we kept having to chase it down, turning the little tracking wheel. When you look at the night sky with the naked eye, everything appears peaceful and still, but seen through a telescope, everything appears to be racing across the sky, which I suppose it is. In reality, everything is turning and travelling and rotating at thousands of miles an hour, all the time. I actually find it very humbling to be reminded of this, that nothing stops for you. Whether you like it or not, the planets still go on turning, just the same, every day, as they have been doing for all our ancestors so many thousands of years ago. While we're talking about Saturn, I can't let pass my favourite fact about the planet. The rings were first observed in the early 17th century by Galileo Galilei, although he mistook what he saw for 3 planets all orbiting one another, the largest being Saturn, and the other 2 what he referred to as Saturn's ears. Over time, other astronomers made more accurate predictions that what they were viewing was a ring system, although there was debate as to the makeup and the origins of the rings. Some thought they were rock, some gas, some dust, some light. But my favourite, please welcome to the debate a man named Leo Alatius, a Greek scholar and keeper of the Vatican Library, who had his own theory to announce. 2 seemingly unrelated but pressing issues for the Vatican in the time of the Renaissance included, number 1, dealing with the heresy of astronomers who were trying to suggest that the Earth might not in fact be the centre of the universe, and number 2, trying to curtail and control the mass production of religious relics springing up in every little town's church. Specifically, debate raged around what had happened to Jesus' foreskin after his death. Born into the Jewish faith, Jesus was obviously circumcised at 8 days old, and given that after his death his body did not remain on earth but ascended to heaven, well, this left the dilemma of where did his foreskin go? I mean, it couldn't have just rotted away on earth, surely. This was a piece of the body of Christ. It's sacred and holy. Some scholars said that it ascended to heaven with him, but that didn't take into account that all over Europe there were churches that claimed to have it, preserved among their collection of other relics of bits of dead saints or pieces of the one true cross. A tiny, wrinkly, leathery bit of our Lord's penis. Alatius saw a solution to both of these problems, and in a text titled A Discourse on the Foreskin of Our Lord Jesus Christ, he declared that after Jesus ascended to heaven, his foreskin went up with him to the heavens and became the rings of Saturn, encircling the planet forevermore to remind us of his sacrifice. That's right, the rings of Saturn are baby Jesus' foreskin. This is weird, but the church is weird. I mean, perhaps no less bizarre than St. Catherine of Siena, who a few hundred years prior to that had claimed that she'd experienced a mystic wedding with none other than Christ himself, becoming his heavenly bride, and their wedding ring being made not of gold or jewels, but, you guessed it, the ring of Christ's foreskin. Perhaps I wasn't so mad after all for disbelieving what I saw through that telescope in the back garden. The night sky is full of wonders we find it difficult to comprehend. Every culture across the globe has made up stories to explain what we see in the night sky, from the Chinese zodiac to the Roman gods to the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians, and a giant mystical floating foreskin. Sometimes it's easier to tell ourselves a weird story than face the true wonder and madness of the night sky.
For the life of a man it is but a span, and cut down in his flower. We are here today and tomorrow we're away. We are creatures of an hour. Awake, awake, we are creatures of an hour. Oh, teach your children well, my dear, as long as here you stay. For it might be well for your sweet soul when your body lies under the clay. Awake, awake, when your body lies under the clay.
While we're on the strange intersection of space and religion, rapidly becoming one of my favourite subject areas, we must talk about Gervase of Canterbury's account of his lunar observation. Gervase was a monk and chronicler in the 12th century who wrote these remarkable words concerning the evening of the 18th of June 1178. He reported that monks of the abbey had witnessed the upper horn of the moon split in two. From the midpoint, a flaming torch sprang up, spewing out fire, hot coals, and sparks. Meanwhile, the body of the moon throbbed like a wounded snake. This phenomenon was repeated a dozen times or more, the moon assuming various twisting shapes at random. Then, the moon, from horn to horn, took on a blackish appearance. What the actual hell is that all about? I think sometimes we like to think of strange natural phenomena terrifying people of the past because they didn't understand the explanations for them like we do now. But honestly, this sounds terrifying. If I saw that today, I don't think I would calmly affirm that there is some scientific explanation for the moon writhing like a snake under bursts of fire and plumes of black smoke. I think I would be freaked the hell out and believe the end times has come, as perhaps Gervase and his monk friends were. It reminds me of last summer when I saw Starlink flying overhead whilst on holiday in France. For those that don't know, Starlink is Elon Musk's veritable army of satellites orbiting all in a perfect straight line formation and causing nightmares for astronomers back down on Earth. And I remember thinking, if I didn't know what that was, then I would for sure believe that we were being invaded by aliens, signalling the end of days. Instead, we're just being invaded by Elon Musk and his terrifying corporate control, signalling the end of days. Anyway, back to those monks. Various historians have tried to find explanations for what they might have observed, including the suggestion that they witnessed an asteroid colliding with the moon's surface, something that must have looked impossibly awesome. The trouble with this theory is there isn't an identified crater on the moon that quite fits the timescale. There was a crater long thought to have been at the root of this story, but it was recently estimated by NASA to be closer to 4 million years old than 1,000 years old, so that doesn't quite add up. Another suggestion is that they were just perfectly in the right place at the right time to see an exploding meteor entering the Earth's atmosphere right in front of the face of the moon relative to where they were stood on Earth, and that they mistook this for a fire happening actually on the moon. This theory would explain why there doesn't seem to be any other surviving accounts of apocalyptic moon activity in 1178, although even then you'd think someone else would write down a huge fireball in the sky. I guess there were just fewer people writing things down back then, and few of their writings survive. The thing is that unlikely and inexplicable things happen all the time. In fact, it would be a strange coincidence to live in a world without coincidences. Give it enough time, and someone somewhere is sure to see a meteor exploding across the face of the moon. And while they may view it as a sign of the end times, I think they're pretty damn lucky. It's estimated that about 25 million meteors enter the Earth's atmosphere every single day, and of those, around 500 a year make it to the Earth's surface. Airbursts, that is, meteors that explode with significant force in the Earth's atmosphere, they happen somewhere between 1 and 10 times a year. Essentially, the larger the object entering the atmosphere, the more likelihood it has of reaching the Earth, but also there is a lower likelihood of larger and larger objects entering the atmosphere. Most of them are the size of a grain of sand. So, yes, it's unlikely, but not at all impossible that those monks in the 1100s saw an airburst across the moon. I guess we'll never know. But unlikely things do happen, and sometimes they're incredibly lucky, sometimes incredibly unlucky, sometimes it's hard to tell. Like the story of Anne Hodges, an Alabaman woman who, in 1954, became the only known person to ever be hit by a meteorite when it crashed through the roof of her house and struck her as she was taking a nap on the sofa. Not only was she hit by the falling rock, but she survived it with little more than a few bruises, and, understandably, a lifelong fear of being hit by a meteorite. Not joking, apparently she was never the same afterwards, becoming anxious and paranoid and retreating into herself. And this is the bit I find wild. After the event, there was a big media storm around it. Journalists flocked to her house to interview her, and several people offered to buy the meteorite off her for several thousands of dollars. But as she was renting her home, the landlord claimed that the meteorite belonged to him. As I think I've discussed in a previous episode, landlords do themselves no favours when trying to convince me that they're not all evil, greedy bastards. Anyway, eventually, after a long legal battle, the Hodges paid out $500 to settle the case, and they were allowed to keep the rock. But by this time, no one was really interested in purchasing it anymore. More than 10 years later, Anne's husband recalls that she sold the meteorite to the local museum for around $25. I don't know if Anne was incredibly lucky to survive being hit, or incredibly unlucky to have been hit in the first place, but I think she deserves a mention here. Fireballs and twisting plumes of smoke was probably pretty shocking to these 12th century monks, but the idea of seeing strange shapes in the moon was nothing new. Many cultures have gazed up at the various shaded greys and milky whites of the moon's mountains and craters, and read stories into them. Well-known examples of this include seeing a man's face in the moon, or a hair in the moon, or my own favourite, the forests on the moon, people mistaking the darker patches for the canopies of trees, which is honestly beautiful. And there are trees that have been to the moon, or almost to the moon, and we've lost some of them. Let me explain. In 1971, during the Apollo 14 mission when Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell walked on the surface of the moon, approximately 500 seeds were brought aboard the shuttle, and they remained in orbit around the moon with Stuart Rooser while the other two descended. The seeds were from 5 different species of American tree: the loblolly pine, I enjoy that name, the sycamore, the sweet gum, the redwood, and the Douglas fir. After the mission, many of the seeds were germinated and planted all over the US, and they were given as gifts to other nations and fondly referred to as moon trees. And my favourite thing about this story? It's thought that about 15 seeds were gifted to Britain, and we've lost them. We just don't know what happened to them. No one knows if they were ever planted, and if so, where, or if they just got stuffed in someone's drawer somewhere. We just forgot to write it down. The British Royal Astronomical Society put out an article only 3 years ago asking people to let them know if they found any of the seeds or the trees, but as of yet, none have been identified. There's a folk music trope that I love. You see it crop up time and time again across different songs in what's referred to as floating verses. That's lines that crop up again and again, adopted from one or another song and just recycled. The trope that I love is describing an impossibly unlikely or implausible thing to explain how something will never happen. For example, Robert Burns used this in A Red, Red Rose when he wrote that he will love his dear till all the seas gang dry and the rocks melt with the sun. Other examples I find littered around old folk ballads are things like when the sun sets in the east, or when the fish may fly, or when the sun and the moon meet in yon sky. Except this last one does happen. Not often, but predictably, and I think we call this a solar eclipse, that unlikely coincidence when the moon and the sun do meet in yon sky, so perfectly align, and one obscures the other, that some people have called divine. I remember seeing one as a child in 1999 down in Devon, and another partial eclipse in 2015. They were alien and uncanny, and again, if I hadn't known about them beforehand, I could have been forgiven for thinking that the world was ending. Be careful what you promise, though. If you claim that you'll love someone till the sun and the moon do meet in yon sky, well, the next near-total eclipse visible from the UK will be in summer 2026, and I'm already looking forward to it. Unlikely things happen more often than you think.
When you're dead and in your grave and covered over with clay, the worms shall eat your flesh, my dear, and your body shall mold away.
Awake, awake, and your body shall mold away. Now my carol's done, and I must be gone. No longer can I stay here. So bless you all, both great and small, and I wish you a joyful new year. Awake, awake, and I wish you a joyful new year.
I can't quite remember when I developed a fear of death, but I was probably about 5 years old. This seems pretty standard, actually. Most children go through a period where they learn that nothing lasts forever, and that one day they and everyone they know and love will die. As an adult, I can say this remark quite flippantly. I suppose I've had quite a long time to come to terms with the concept. But looking back as a kid, it seemed so real, and I couldn't comprehend sometimes how everyone was just getting on with their lives, and not screaming the whole time, "We're all going to die!" To be honest, I do still have moments like this, where I look around at society, and I think, what are we all doing here? Doesn't everyone realise that we're just bags of meat, and nothing matters, and we're all going to die? On my bad days, this can be cripplingly depressing, but on my good days, this feeling is actually the most liberating thing I can experience. Nothing really matters. I remember as a kid developing this terrible fear of skulls. My dad used to enjoy watching Time Team on the telly, something my mum found unbearably boring. At those fairly regular moments where they might unearth some bones or a whole skeleton, I could never quite bring myself to look. I'd seen some pretty intense horror films at that age. I remember my mum insisting that we watch The Village of the Damned together when I was about 6 or 7 years old. A man barbecuing his own head? I was fine with that. But an old jawbone or an eye socket on a family-friendly archaeology show? I just couldn't do it. I think I would have hated this song when I was younger. The description of the worms eating someone's flesh would have been way too graphic for me and triggered my death anxiety. But I love this song now, and I kind of get it. There are many folk songs that speak of dead lovers or brothers or children lying under the earth or returning to haunt family members or begging to be released from this earthly life. There's always something creepy and beautiful and real about them, and they usually have something to say. There's that well-known ballad, The Unquiet Grave, that has a line in it about kissing cold clay lips and smelling the earthly strong breath of the dead. It's gross, but I guess in days of old, that song was a warning of the perils of mourning too long. What I enjoy about this song, The Moon Shines Bright, is that it follows a strange narrative arc. First collected in 1893 from a traveller family in Sussex, and generally considered either a Maytime carol or a New Year's carol, most variants go somewhere along the lines of this. "Oh, isn't the moon beautiful? We should all pray to the Lord and give thanks, because we're all gonna die sooner than we think, and then we'll rot under the earth and get eaten by worms and maggots. Oh, and Happy New Year!" I'll be honest, I do understand why Auld Lang Syne has become the preferred New Year's song. But I like this song. I find New Year's Eve a very optimistic time of year, a time that we look back at old friends, present and not, and we're grateful for their existence in our lives. And also, it's a time for looking forward to all the things that we want to do and saying, all right, let's get a move on. Time isn't infinite, and I want to make the most of it. Essentially, we're gonna be dead soon, so let's tick a few things off the bucket list. Sometimes, when I look at the moon, I think of death. But not in a sad way, in a humbling way. A way that puts everything into a little more perspective. The moon has always been there, will always be there, at least for as long as we're around. The stars will keep on twinkling and turning, the planets will keep on wandering, and Saturn's rings will keep on looking quite unbelievable. They are all so big and timeless, and we are all so small and insignificant, and I find that deeply calming. I can stare at the moon for hours, but I shouldn't, because we're all going to die soon, and I have things to do. And besides, there are so many other things in the night sky I haven't discovered yet. I should see if my dad still has that telescope.
Oh, the moon shines bright, and the stars give her light, a little while before the day. Now the bell it is rung, I will walk the journey long, and I bid you awake and pray. Awake, awake, and I bid you awake and pray.
Thanks for listening to Birthright Ballads, which was written and produced by me, Jamie Cook. You also heard music from Max Kieseler and Jenny CZ, one half of the band Moon Matter, who you should definitely check out. If you'd like to hear the full songs and more of the music from this series, then you can find all of the tracks on Bandcamp at birthrightballads.bandcamp.com. Please tell your friends if you've enjoyed the podcast. Word of mouth is the best way to share things around. And if you want to get in touch to say hi or with comments or episode suggestions, I'd genuinely love to hear from you. You can find us on Instagram at Birthright Ballads. And finally, this podcast is free for all to enjoy. But if you want to support the podcast, then you can go to patreon.com/birthrightballads and buy me a coffee if you so wish. Any amount is appreciated. Thanks again, and see you next time.